now going to introduce you to our first speaker of the day, and we couldn't be more thrilled, really, because many of you will be aware that this conference was rooted in the crop circle phenomenon. That's how it all started. Gradually, over the years, it's embraced other subjects and other topics. So the crop circle phenomenon is now a very small part of what we do. But in our 25th year, it feels so important to us that we start off our conference with someone who is an expert on the phenomenon and is steeped in research. So our next speaker is a founding member of the Wiltshire Crop Circle Research Group and also a fellow conference organizer. For many, many years, she was organizing conferences on crop circles. And so she's going to give us an overview of how it's been over these years and how we got to where we are today. So ladies and gentlemen, give the most enormous welcome, please, to Francine Blake.
Hello. Gosh, there's a bit of an echo here. Okay, a little bit about myself. I come from Canada. I moved to this country a long time ago because I was seeking ancient knowledge, which I was unable to find in a young country like Canada. So I came to Europe for a stage. I had a grant to do that, and I came here to spend 6 months, and I'm still here. Because I found ancient knowledge in this country. It's so full of it, you know, the ancient structures and so on, Avebury and so on. So I discovered the crop circle in 1989, simply because I had seen a simple drawing, just a circle, into the newspaper, weekend newspaper, and I was very I felt something very strong, although it was a simple circle. So I started to come here to Glastonbury to listen to speakers and so on, because there was quite a lot of talk about crop circles. And in the end, I started the group, but it just sort of formed by itself, really, interested people and so on. So crop circles tend to be found in ancient monuments. And this is the world over. I've traveled a lot of places to talk about crop circles, and actually, in actual fact, every country has crop circles, even in China, in Russia. The first lecture I ever heard of was from a Russian scientist who was telling us about the crop circles in his country. And I was very struck because he said that when you enter a crop circle, it's not the same time. Time is different. It runs differently. And it's perhaps why when we go into a crop circle, we lose sense of time, and we tend to spend lots of you know, we think it's a half an hour, and we may have stayed for 2 hours or something. So it's very mysterious, and it's important to study. I've always felt that. They are found in usually near the ancient monument, and here we find many around Stonehenge, and that's Avebury, and the Silbury Hill. It's around this area that we find the crop circle. Now, in America, in Ohio, where there is this wonderful serpent mound, this is where they have the crop circles. And I don't know if they still have an organization there, but they used to have an organization similar to ours. And they studied the crop circle, and they found them around these ancient monuments. In fact, they found the lines of energies. They were able to determine the lines of energy in America because they weren't really aware of that. And the crop circle tend to come on energy lines. I think that the crop circle, in fact, are a kind of re-energizing mechanism for the planet. I think our planet is extremely depleted, and the crop circle always come near ancient sites which are placed on lines of energy, and they are re-energizing the planet, because in the early days people had all sorts of instruments, not just dowsing, but proper, you know, not electronic, but scientific instruments to measure the energy of the land, and we find that actually where there's been a crop circle, the energy level has gone up. So here we find them near the old monument, like Silbury Hill, which has seen a lot of crop circle around it. The White Horse are also areas that the crop circle come. And here is an example. You see, I hope this is the pointer, I think. Yeah, you see how close it is to an ancient monument, the West Kennet Long Barrow, Silbury Hill. So I've always felt that they are so attractive, the crop circles. When you look at something like that, most people feel the desire to go and visit them. And they come, we visit them, and as we visit them, we discover the ancient monuments which are nearby, if you see what I mean. And the people who are not interested in crop circles, but only interested in the monument, well, they have the chance to discover the crop circle at the same time, if you see what I mean. It's a kind of crossing. You go to the ancient site, discover the crop circle. You go to the crop circle, discover the ancient site. There is evidence of crop circles in the past. Some people have done some very deep studies about it, in particular Andreas Müller, who has found 9,000 mention of crop circle in the ancient annals, annals, I don't know how you say that in English, annals, I think, ancient books and so on, and records all over the place. And he's been to Africa, South Africa, he's been to many, many countries. France, Europe, he's discovered about 9,000 records of strange patterns that happen overnight and in the past. And the problem with that is that it was quite dangerous, because if you happen to you live in a little village and suddenly a big design happen in your areas, you would be likely to be accused of witchcraft. And the way he was able to find out how many crop circles there were in the past is by the record of people who had been burned at the stake because there had been a crop circle in their village. So it was very difficult for him to study that, and he's still troubled by it. But this is how he found out that there were these designs around. And here, sorry, I'm going to talk to you a bit more about that. This is a woodcut that is dated 1678, August the 2nd, 22nd, 1678. It shows a devil making a crop circle. And the article said that that night the farmer he was about to harvest his crop, and he asked a harvester, a man to come and harvest his crop, and the person said that he charged quite a lot of money, because it's at the time of the plague, you see, and there weren't many people who were left in the countryside. So he asked for a high price to cut his field, and the farmer was so incensed that he sent it to the devil. He cursed him, and that very night the field was found there was a flash of light. The field was all of a light, and the next morning was found laid down by the devil or some other infernal spirit, that no one was able to harvest the crop. So it wasn't very good, not very healthy subject to study in those days. Luckily, now, the only thing we don't have to worry about anything. We can go and visit the crop circle and study them and record them and everything else. But it has an element of, it is difficult to be taken seriously, and that is a downside for a lot of people. They don't like to be thought of as cranky. Now, we did go about this in quite a serious way and started to collect plants. And for example, we would collect plants from the standing crop. And the standing crop looks like this. This happens to be barley. No, it's not barley, it's wheat actually. And the nodes of the plant, because there are nodes in the wheat, such as this. And you can see that in some specimen in the crop circle, it shows that there are some cavities. It shows where the steam has come out of the plant, because the plant is heated from the inside, and the steam comes out in the node usually and creates these cavities. And that's how we know that something important has happened. You can see in this example that they're all bent at the node, and it's all swollen there. And if you put an instrument, it affects our instrument quite strongly. and particularly the compass. And I have taken compasses in crop circle, and often the needle just turns around continuously, it won't settle on, or it will show you the south or the east in the wrong direction. So it does affect our instrument. And many cameras have been destroyed by crop circle. I've had to change cameras several times, especially when you go right above it and it's very fresh. It can ruin your camera, actually. I've lost 2 Hasselblad, and it's quite an expensive business. It can affect a helicopter as well. And once we were right above a new crop circle, and all the needles were going like that, and we shot out of there as fast as we could, because it is very disconcerting, quite frightening. Now, early on, people started to do some experiments and to see it under the microscope, the difference between with the juice that you find in the plant and inside the crop circle, and the same on the outside. And this shows, this is actually wheat that was taken, and it was juiced, and the juice was looked under the microscope. This happens to be the ordinary wheat outside the design, okay? And it can go several feet outside the design. So this is what it looks like. Now, this is the same wheat, but it's inside the formation. It's quite different. Something quite profound has happened to this. Oh, wait a minute. Ah, yeah. So the next example is in a field of colza, and this is after the bloom was finished, so the energy wasn't too strong. We would put our bottles in there, and we then looked at the imprint, and this is the imprint in that design. You can see that it repeats the pattern. And then we did it. Why is it not working, this? Am I not pointing the right place? Right, and you can see this was the design I was showing you. And just across the road, that's below Wisconnet Long Barrow, we have what we called a scorpion design. And we put the water in the scorpion design, and this is the pattern that we found, which really indicates that it imprints itself in the water, actually, in the sap of the plant, which means that when we lie down in the crop circle, we get downloaded by this pattern. And the pattern contains knowledge. This is a snake, a serpent. Well, a serpent has a lot of knowledge encoded into that. So that's why we are taking this very seriously, and we like to do all these experiments and so on. And this was actually taken in colza. Now no, it's not in colza. It had some beautiful little flower. I can't remember the name. Flax, that's right. It's a field of flax, a design in flax. And it's beautiful, like a diamond and so on. And that is the pattern in that. It's absolutely staggering when you put a drop of water under the microscope, and that's what you see. It's amazing, you know. So what that means is we get these impressions when we go in. And that's an example in colza. Now, this another aspect of the crop circle is the fact that it's imprinted very lightly, and which means that a lot of people can't see it on the ground. You know, we sometimes say, we are told there's a crop circle, we go there, we can't see anything. In fact, that's what happens to me in this design. I had taken a photograph, an aerial shot the day before, and I asked my colleague of mine, someone from my group, and she'd been in. I didn't know where it was exactly. It's difficult to orientate yourself when you're in a helicopter. Anyway, she took me to the crop circle, and she said, "Here we are, we're in it." And I said, "Where? I can't see anything. I can't see anything." But this is what it looked like. This is what I was inside. It's so lightly pressed, that's what I could see. Do you see what I mean? They were so lightly pressed, it was invisible. So the farmers don't often see there's a crop circle there. It's not always pressed quite firmly. Sometimes it's very lightly pressed. And it happens to be a fractal, this. It's a fractal. It's a beautiful fractal. And that's another example. of the size of the crop circles. You know, they are very large. People may think it's tiny little things, but actually it's massive. This was in front of Stonehenge. You can see people in here. And interestingly, that happened after 9/11, the year after 9/11, on the 9/11 actually. No, it's not. Am I saying it's not that? The year after 9/11, people were thinking maybe something in the crop circle will have, you know, and people were frightened there would be another attack in America and so on. And this is what turned up. And we thought that this is a symbol of peace. This is a symbol of peace and quite jolly and so on, and a flower. Another example of a crop circle, and that's where my camera was completely, only the two first pictures I was able to use, because after that it completely wiped out all the celluloid. That's another example, is here again, based on 6. And we can find them in this beautiful blue flax. It's quite rare in blue flax. We've had a few examples, but not many. It's quite a rare thing. Very beautiful in blue. And this is in maize and corn, you know, corn on the cob. Now, maize is a very hard, I mean, I'm Canadian, so I can tell you about maize because we grow a lot of maize, we eat a lot of maize. And it's a very thick plant with a very big, hard stem, about that size. And if you try to bend that, it's impossible to bend that. You'd have to go like this on a knee. And these were bent just like wheat, completely bent like right down. And this is in maize. So it is pretty amazing. You can find them in snow and in ice in a northern country. But in fact, there was one here in ice on the... This is in North American pictures, but in England, there was a nice circle about 10, 15 years ago, and I was rung on Christmas Day, would you believe? Christmas Day, I get a phone call, someone said, we've just found a nice circle. We were having a walk, and by the river, there's a nice circle. Would you like to come and see it? I said, no, I'm busy. I've got the whole you know, this is that kind of thing. People ring you any time and so on. But there was a circle like that, a nice circle, swirling. And the thing about this ice circle is, if you have them in a stream, you can explain them. Well, of course, it's turning because it's in a stream, but we can find them on water that does not, on lakes, for example. There's no current of water, and they've been found in the sea in Canada, just on close to the shore, obviously, but a massive crop circle, and that was very thick ice in Canada, about that thick, and it was turning for days and days and days. So it is quite mysterious. And that one, you see the amazing complexity of the lay here, and that apparently has to do with hormones or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but what I do remember is the fact that it was almost like it was knitted. The wheat was so completely twisted that it was quite extraordinary. And here you have a beautiful little swirl in the middle. Now these things are twisted exactly as if it's a hurricane that's taking it, and you can actually sit a little child on top of that without breaking it. It's a very strong pattern there. And look at the lay here of the crop, which was quite amazing. And apparently this happened within half an hour because it's close to the little airfield at Yatesbury, and when the pilot took off to take people to see the crop circle, he comes back 20 minutes later, and there was a crop circle there that wasn't there when they took off. So it is a rapid thing. They can be extremely big. 1994, half a mile long at Ashbury. I think that was a very long crop. And if you look at compared to the road, how big and how long that is. And I went to see it. I was asked to give a presentation about crop circle when this happened. The village called me and said, could you tell us about crop circle, please? Because we've had a really big one in the field. You know, it's just on the half a mile long. It's very big. And so I spoke to the farmer, and he came to the conference. He listened without telling me he was in the field. But then afterwards he said he wanted to talk about it. And he said, you know, I stood on my tractor, and he said, I could not see where it started, and it was so big that I couldn't see its point of origin, you know. So, and this one was 1/8 of a mile. Now, it affects our instruments, and I've had a lot of experience like that. At the time where we were on film, the film could be washed out. It could be, you know, there was all sorts of things. It imprints all sorts of things come on the pellicle. So I want to show you well, first of all, this is a double formation. There was a serpent, and next to it, I'll show you what else was next to it. There's a double formation, and people have been watching all night. It's below Eastfield. This is in Eastfield, below Adam's grave, and people were watching from Adam's grave, and then he went to sleep, as one does, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, very tired, just before dawn. And when dawn started, when it was starting to get light, and they woke up after about an hour, 2 hours, this was these two formations. There was a double formation in the field, very, very big. So people don't, you know, it happens quickly. Just to give you an idea of the size, this is a person here. There's a man standing there, that little dot. And as I said, the whole of my film was like this. Like this. It was completely blotched. And I rang the technician. He told me he was fed up with the crop circle. It affects his instrument. It affects my film. He didn't like it. He said, quite frankly, you can go somewhere else because it affects the whole batch. There was a whole batch of pictures. Only yours was like this. And he said, I don't like it. He's getting worried. And next to the serpent was this long formation. We called it the long formation. And that was 1990. I think it was 1990, 91. And it actually was like a revision of the first 10 years, because it had all the components of all the different crop circles that we've had, different types of crop circle. But what is interesting is what's in front of it. And people called it the light ship, because it does look as if it is something flying right in front of it, and it's even casting a shadow. And you can see the portholes here. Now, I didn't see that when I took the picture, but it felt very peculiar up there. You know, it was very strange. The atmosphere was very, very strange. And sometimes we see things like that. Now, the person who took this picture, she gave me that picture, but she said when she took it, she didn't see anything in the sky, but you can see it on the camera. The camera can capture things. The camera doesn't have prejudice. This is the thing. It will just take what's in front of it. We have prejudice. We project. So sometimes, the camera is neutral. It will take what it is. And if you don't believe in flying saucer, there's one in front of you, you may not see it, but the camera captures it. And that's another very interesting thing. I was there when that was taken, and it's a group of French people who come here every summer, and they just spend most of their time in and out of formation, and they take pictures and so on, and they often get very strange photographs, and this is one of them. And I was with them on that day, and I can tell you that it was perfectly normal day. It was in daylight. There was nothing ordinary, except that at a certain point, I felt as if I was in the underground, going through the underground in the dark, in the tube. That's what I felt like. We all had the kind of feeling we were moving into something else, and it was dark. And that's what the camera captured. And these guys I was with them, and I was in there, and they were taking their measurement and so on. And look what's happening behind them. You see? And you can see that it is in movement. You can see shadow underneath, a shadow on the cloud. But we couldn't see that. We could not see that. The camera captured it. And that one is also very interesting, because that was taken in daytime. And you see the little fairies. They look like fairies, you know. So I think that crop circles are a very privileged area, because you're actually not in the fully in the third dimension. You're entering a space that is completely different. Time is different. Sometimes we feel we've been in the formation for 2 hours. We've only been there for 20 minutes, or vice versa. We think we've been there 20 minutes. We've been there 2 hours, and that's very common. Now, what I want to show you here is that crop circles are simply, the wheat is laid down. It's not broken. It's not pressed. It's very light and fluffy. And it somehow reflects the light differently. Now, I cannot understand how that can be, to be honest. I can't understand that something that's been flattened and on the ground just looks like it's been flattened, suddenly from the top reflects the light differently. This is incredibly difficult to conceive of even. But here you can see, whoops, hang on. Here you can see shadow, and next to it, light. But on the ground, it was all flat. There was none of this, and we couldn't see any of that. You had people here sitting there. But from the air, you really see the three-dimensionality of it. See? And when we follow the lines, you just follow the lines of the shadow and the light, and you get 7 trees of light, 7 trees of life in here, and then you get a 7-pointed star in here. So there is a lot of geometry encoded in the crop circles. Now, crop circles is a very difficult subject. It is difficult. I find it difficult. Everybody finds it difficult because we're stretched continuously. It demands a lot of us. And we seem to live like in a kind of bubble because nobody else seems to know what's going on or is aware of this phenomenon or believes in this phenomenon. It's been debunked tremendously. And so we try to get as much evidence as we possibly can. But it is a difficult subject. First of all, we have to have permission of the farmer. That's not very straightforward. Usually, we are aggressed. People aggress me. You know, I ring, can I speak? What's your name? Francine Blake. We know who you are. We don't like what you do. Baff! So it's difficult. It's very difficult, you know. We all have feelings, and it's difficult. I try to be polite and so on. But it's very, very difficult. And then we have to find out where it is. Well, it's easier now with the internet and the aerial photography, but in the past it was quite difficult to find out where they were. And then once we found out where they are, we have to get to it. And it can be quite far into the field. So that means we have to walk for a long time. It can be very hot, the sun is hot, or it can be raining. It can take time. It can take 2 or 3 hours to visit the crop circle, in and out, and so on. So people need to go to the toilet. There's no toilets, that kind of stuff. So in a practical sense, you have to earn the crop circle. You know, you have to earn it. You have to make efforts. You have to devote yourself. And once you get into it, you can't see the design. And people get fed up sometimes because I take them there and they say, it looks awful. What's this? It looks like a total mess. It's disgusting. It's horrible. And then when we look at it from the air, well, come on. That's what it looked like. And that again makes you think, you know, we see things at ground level in a way. We don't necessarily go above it. For crop circle, you need to go above it to see it. And that to me is a real lesson in life because even in our ordinary life, to see something properly, you have to detach yourself from it and you see the overall picture. In other words, you have to go above it. And with the crop circle, this is what it is. You have to get there. It's difficult. By the time you get in there, you can't see anything, and it looks a mess. You have to go above it to appreciate it. Do you see what I mean? So it's a real lesson to me in life. You have to go above things. Now, another aspect is the way that it changes. A design can change just because of the play of light and shadow. And this is quite a good example because I took this photograph And when you take a picture, normally you go around it and you take it from different angles. So I took it from this angle. This is 4 labyrinths, by the way. They look to us like labyrinths, and they are. And we had to, you know, when we walked into it, it took quite a long time to actually get into the center. Just looking like this, you see that you go on and on and on and on and on. You never get in the middle. Finally, you get in the middle. So it took about 20 minutes per quarters, if not half an hour, actually, to visit this properly. But the result that most people didn't go into many. They would just go into one, and that was enough. And another interesting thing is that there was no point of entry except through the tram line, which is a man-made thing. So the design itself had no point of entry. So to me, that looked like 4 little labyrinths. When I went a little bit further up, suddenly it looks quite different. It looks like a Celtic cross. I was amazed by this. I couldn't believe it. Suddenly I looked down. It's not the same design, just because of the light, you know? Isn't it extraordinary? Now, the crop circles, we don't know when they come. We don't know what time they'll come. We have no idea. We just don't know. It just happens. And although we can develop a kind of third sense, I compare that sometimes to a Canadian able to tell you it's going to snow because they can smell the snow a couple of days before it will arrive. We do that. We say, oh, yeah, it's going to, yeah, well, there's going to be snow. We better be careful. And the crop circle, we can sense, oh, that field, I can, but I've been into so many formations, I can actually tell you that field, it's ripe for a crop circle, it's coming, and usually it does. So we can sense them if we've been interacting with them for a long time. So at Stonehenge, I wanted to show you about Stonehenge here, because this design happened in daytime, which is, in fact, we don't know when they happen. We don't know when they happen because we never see it. So we assume it's at night because it's dark. But it can be at any time. And I have had farmers tell me that they sometimes come into the field to go harvesting or spraying or whatever, and there's nothing. And as they turn around the corner and they come back to the point of entry, there's a crop circle. You know? That is quite impressive. That is very impressive. And they tell me quietly, you know, in my ear. So they can happen in daytime, I know that. And they will happen in any condition. It can happen in dry condition, of course, but also in the rain. It doesn't matter. They just happen, and it's very rapid. So this one, we know what time it happened because it was very close to Stonehenge. It's just opposite here. Whoops. It's just opposite, across the road, and this is slightly elevated. And therefore, we know the time. When it happened, we contacted the farmer, and he came to see us in the field. And he told us that, let me remember this properly now. We were waiting. He told us to wait for him in the field. And when he came to the field at it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we could sense him before we could see him. There was 2 of us waiting for him. It happened to be on a hill, this design, and we couldn't see the farmer, although we were expecting him. We started to feel his anger before he turned up. So we were quite prepared we knew he was very angry, and we could feel it. We could feel it physically. So he turned up, and he was very distressed. And he said he was distressed because he'd had crop circles before. Stonehenge is quite, you know, there's been quite a crop circle there. And he said he was distressed because he had visited his field in the afternoon, and there was nothing there. Because on Sunday, you know, because it's Stonehenge, he tries to keep an eye on his field, and he went and had a look to the field, that area, and there was nothing there. And about half an hour later or 40 minutes later, when he was driving home, he saw the crop circle. So he knew it happened very quickly. And he said, it happened very quickly. I know it happened very quickly. And at the same time, he says, but that cannot happen. And he was having a psychotic attack. He really was. We were so worried because he could not be in either one mindset or the other. He was completely taken out of his comfort zone. And he was, you know, stamping his foot and putting his hand on his eyes and so on. And we were at a loss to try to help him, you know, because we thought he was going to die of a heart attack right in front of us. So I said to him, I just had an idea that came to my mind. I said, let the people in and charge. And he went, and he did that. He put the next day, next day or 2 days later, I can't remember, I went back to Stonehenge, and there was a massive sign on the side of a motorway, crop circle with an arrow, this way. And he had something like 20,000 visitors. I said, charge £3. He was charging £3. He had 20,000 visitors. It was extraordinary, actually. I've never seen anything like that. 20,000 visitors, a lot of people. And you know, in the end, there was no wheat left in the design because of the footfall, but also because people were collecting, you know, crops that had been enhanced by the crop circle. And so people were collecting the crops, so there was no crop left. So it was a sand circle, an earth circle. And when it became an earth circle, people started to collect some earth. So they'd come with jars and fill the jar, you know, to help their plants, because they think it's charged up, so it will help our plants. So it's filling up the jars and going home. So it was full of potholes everywhere. I've never seen anything like this. It was extraordinary. But the farmer had become very, very happy, and I went there with my husband, and they never look at me. I know I'm small, but you know, I'm still quite visible. But they don't like what I represent, so they tend to ignore me. And he came in, didn't look at me, took my husband by the arm, took him away from me, and he said to John, oh, I said, fantastic, this crop circle, you know. Tell your wife I want another one next year. It's a great adventure, I tell you. And that happened 2 weeks later. We had a similar design that happened quite close at Windmill Hill, actually, which wasn't very far from our house, because we lived in the valley, Vale of Pusey at that time. So that happened, which is actually a continuation of the same theme. Now, people who think that you can just kind of roll out these things, you know, they go, oh, well, let's go and do a crop circle, it takes 5 minutes. It doesn't, because when we had people, you know, trying to do this in the past, there was a lot of experiments of people trying to do a crop circle by hand. It takes a lot of time and a lot of preparation. You know, it can take a couple of days to do that, easily. And the crop circles happen in split second. In fact, there's been 2 examples where they were photographed. At the moment of photographing, the 777, and the other one was earlier on. But anyway, we know that it happened in matters of split seconds, not even a second, 4 milliseconds. The second one, because it was captured on a camera, and it's an infrared camera, it gave us the time of the appearance, and it was 4 milliseconds. You divide a second in 1,000, and it's 4 of these tiny little things. 4 milliseconds. It's instant, absolutely instant. And that is why the plants are not burnt, they're not, you know, they're not damaged. It's like it's steamed into position in a very, very quick time. Right, I'm trying to get my train of thought now. I can deviate sometimes. So, so we know that it happened very rapidly. And we don't know what is going to happen next. So you can get a train of thought, and it can wait 2 years, 3 years. Suddenly you get you know, it kind of, you get the second phase, and so on and so forth. So it's you navigate, and you get these lines of symbols over the years that, you know, kind of manifest. And it's a fantastic study. So this was the second similar example that I've shown you from that. So that was the next stage. Now, when we saw something like that, we could not, for the life of us, imagine what would be the next step. And this is the next step, you see? And then Can you imagine what's going to go the next step to that? Can you imagine? I can't. I'm pretty certain that you can't. But this is the next step. It had 409 circles in this. Now, there's a story about this, because there's always a story about crop circle, because it's interacting with us, you know. Or perhaps it is happening and we interact with it, because we go there, you know, people spend the night there. I've done that. I spend the night there, and we just, perhaps we're going to see something. We probably, you know, we're hoping to see a crop circle happening, so we go where it is very active usually. We watch all night, happens behind us, around the corner. We never see anything, you know. We get sometimes the hint that something has happened, and we had done a night watch with the group once, and suddenly at about 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe around there actually, we were sitting there with our sandwiches, and we can't see much, but you know, we're just hoping maybe there'd be something. So there was something, and there was a kind of flash, and then the herd of bullocks, who were at the top of the field, and we didn't know they were there, because when we arrived, we couldn't see them. They were right at the top. Suddenly, were charging directly in front. They were coming directly towards us. It was like a stampede, you know? And I'm thinking, we're all going, there's a stampede. You know, it's terribly frightening. And then suddenly, we saw them at the light of our flashlight, and they just veered off. And I said, that's it, the crop circle that's happened. But we couldn't see anything. And there was nothing in the valley, but we found it the next day. Actually, across the field, there was a crop circle that happened. So they come with a flash. When people have used camera and you know, timed it, you know, you got a timer going, the camera going all night, and there's been thousands and thousands of these experiments. You never see anything. Nothing's ever happened, or it happens behind you or around the corner. You never see anything. The camera can capture it, and it's been captured twice. There's been hundreds and hundreds of times people are going. It's only twice. And it takes 4 milliseconds for a crop circle to appear. You divide a second into 1,000, 4 milliseconds. It's terribly rapid. And this one had a little story about it. There was a person who I used to see quite a lot of. He used to come here quite often. I haven't seen him for a long time now, but he is a solicitor, and he lives in London. And he'd just like to come to Wiltshire to kind of see something different, you know, from what he does normally. And so he comes here and he camps. He puts a tent up on top of the hills usually and tries to watch all night and see if he sees flashes of light or whatever. And that's what he did. He put his tent right up to the top of Milk Hill, and he was facing in the direction of Silbury Hill, and of Silbury Hill actually. And behind him was the White Horse and the Vale of Pewsey. And so at about 8 o'clock, having set himself up properly, he decides to go down to have a look at the White Horse. And so he did that. And when he came back, he saw something absolutely extraordinary, especially for someone who lives in London, you know. He saw a group of badgers popping out of the ground, you know. I mean, it's not a normal thing to see that usually. He said they were coming up like that, with their paws in the air and then running out as fast as they could. He's going, what's the, another one. And it went on for I don't know how long, but he was absolutely, totally mind-boggled, you know? And then he thought, well, I better check the field. There must be something extraordinary going on there. So he goes in and he starts to walk the tram lines, you know? I mean, if the crop circle had happened when he was there, he would have been pulverized, actually. But he didn't know that, and he was taking his time, and he's walking out up and down the lines and so on. And then he goes back to his tent, which was facing in the wrong direction. It was facing Silbury Hill, and he spends the night munching on his sandwiches, watching the wrong side. It all happened behind him. That happened behind him. And in the morning, he packed his stuff and drove off. He didn't even look at the field. So when he rang me, he was saying, I wish I'd looked at the field. I can't believe this is ridiculous. I was there. I never saw a thing, you know. And so there's a bit of humor in there, actually. It's quite comical. So there's 409 409 circles in here. And you can see that there is a kind of three-dimensional effect. Can you see that? It looks like little Chinese hats, straw hats. And the light was shining differently. So you got a bit of shadow. It's all flat, actually. On the ground, it was absolutely flat. We couldn't see that. But it just shows a shadow and so on, as if it is conical. It was impossible to walk more than one circle. Absolutely impossible. I couldn't do it. I walked one length, and that was enough. Because the way it was laid was clockwise, anti-clockwise, clockwise, anti-clockwise, clockwise, anti-clockwise. So you're going like this. You know, and then you're going back the other side. We were all so dizzy by it. So we were lying, the people were lying down everywhere. And, you know, it was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. Absolutely amazing. And even the person who did a lot of research, Andreas Müller, you know, the German who used to come here to do a lot of research and do the drawings and so on, he said we couldn't do more than one arm. He said we did one arm, and then I decided we will multiply by 6. He couldn't do it. He said it was impossible to do that. I don't know anybody was able to walk the whole length. It was too difficult. So there we are. And there are people sitting in meditation there. No, it was quite amazing. There it is. And from here you can see how it is not in the middle, the center. And you see, it's all off-centered. Now, to do something off-centered is very difficult. John knows someone who is he's hydrographer to the Navy, and the Royal Navy. And he does measurements. That's what he does. They measure depth and so on, and they do the maps and so on and so forth. So we happened to go to one of the functions, and John put our calendar with the image on his plate. And the poor man, you know, sits down. What's this? It's the crop circle. A crop circle, you know, is completely out of his knowledge and of the way he lives. He doesn't know. So anyway, he was looking at that. He was quite amazed. And I said to him, and John said to him, how long will it take people to do that? He said, if I had a team of 10 people, 6 months. But your field would be completely trashed, because they would have to take measurement from the outside. And I said, well, actually, have you looked at it carefully? I said, the center is not in the middle. And he goes, what? How can you do a circle when the center is not in the middle? How can you do an accurate circle when the center is off-centered? And he looked at me and he said, isn't the world wonderful? Thank you.